in the pocket of every first seat in every first row, there is a mirror. So if you guys want to grab that out right now, and then what's going to happen is in a moment, I'm going to read a passage over you. And then as you're reading the passage, what's going to happen is you'll look at the mirror, and then what you'll do is look yourself, and then you're going to pass it down to the next person. Now, if you're at home and you're watching on a live stream, you can either go grab a mirror, or if you're watching it on your phone, you can go grab a mirror, or if you're watching it on your phone, you can turn your phone into selfie mode and look at yourself that way. But if you're watching your phone, then go look in front of a mirror as well. So with that, let me go ahead and read this passage. You guys can start passing it down. Genesis 1:26-27 says, "Then God said, 'Let us make human beings in our image, to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground.' So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." And in Genesis 31:31 says, "Then God looked over all he had made, and he saw that it was very good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the sixth day." Marking the sixth day. So it's amazing when we really begin to take this time out to look at, because this is a declarative statement about us and who we are, and the fact that we are made in his image. And so we've been doing this series called Who Am I? And so far in this series, here's what we've talked about. In week one, we said that living out the image of God is what it means to be fully human, is what it means to be fully human. And then last week, we looked at the fact that our value is not determined in what we build, but in who we reflect. And so if we really get that, so I wanted to spend the first 2 weeks really helping us to understand what it really means to be made in God's image, and what the implications are for us as we are making a commitment to live for him and be able to grow in our relationship with him and being able to serve him and who he is. But if we really understand what it means to be made in the image of God, then there is a question that we have to ask. And it should be a very natural progression, a natural question that comes up. And you can see that question right on the screen. And that is, if my value is found in my reflection of God, what happens when I sin? If my value is found in my reflection of God, what happens when I sin? In Genesis chapter 3, right, where many of us are familiar with that there's a moment that Eve is standing out in the garden. And it's really funny, this morning, as I was practicing the message, I was in my backyard because I like to practice out there in the mornings. And I'm looking, and I turn, in one way, and there's like an avocado tree next to me, and I'm seeing the fruit dangling. And then I turn the other way, and there's like an orange tree in our backyard, and some fruit dangling from there. So I'm just kind of picturing like Eve in that moment. But standing in front of her is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so Satan comes, and Satan tempts her. Now, the thing that he tempts her with is something very interesting to me. And I think it's something that it's kind of easy for us to miss, but I think that there's some insight that we can gain when we understand it. And so here's what happens is Satan says to Eve in Genesis chapter 3, verse 5, "God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil." And then you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. But now here's the thing that's really important for us to understand. In the creation account, it says that let us make man in our what? So the reality is she's already like God. She's already like God. And so the very thing that Satan attacks is the very core and foundation of who she already is. And so what he's trying to get Eve to do now is to break away from understanding that the foundation has been established. You're made in the image of God. You are already a reflection of him, to where now what she's trying to do, or he's trying to get her to do, is to build her image because on her own terms, because basically he's saying to her, God's holding out on you. God's holding out on you. And he doesn't want you to be like him. But the reality is she already was. She already was. And so from that point forward, what Eve does is she steps into that mindset where I need to build my own identity to grow into who I think I could become or who I need to be. And ever since then, that's been the human predicament. That's exactly what we do. We try to build our identity. We try to build our image. We try to build our value. And we've kind of talked about the ways that we do that, whether it's through finances, whether it's through our career, whether it's through even our own self-confidence. But we've been trying to build since then. And the interesting thing is we've been trying to build on what already exists, what's already there. So then what does it mean when it comes to this aspect as we look at sin and what sin does and how it affects us and how it affects our value? Because again, we have this idea that I am made in his image and that I am a reflection of him. So then when it comes to sin, what is the result of sin and what it does? No, that was not my phone. It was the mirror. I have a mirror up here. It's the mirror. So now, as I look at this, because now like I have all the little pieces here, kind of thing. And so as I look at this now, what I see is I see this mirror and I see that this mirror is broken. Now, before I get to that, I wanted to talk about something else. As I was preparing for this, one of the questions that kind of popped into my mind is, well, how does the human eye work? How does it work? So I made myself a list because I wanted to make sure, oh, there's glass on here. I wanted to make sure, I didn't think it would explode like that, but here we go. I wanted to make sure that I covered this well. So what happens is light bounces off an object, and then that light enters our eye through our cornea, passes through the pupil, and then gets focused by the lens onto the retina at the back of the eye. The retina changes the light into electrical signals, and your brain turns those signals into images that you see. Which is, God is incredible. Just when you look at the complexity of the human eye. But here's the thing. As animals, anything that has an eye has that. And so sometimes what we do with our eyes is we can look at something in front of us and we can see like there's a certain reaction that we have to it. As an animal, I look at that and I see predator. So as I see a predator, what does that mean? I should run. Right? Or if I'm a predator, I see prey, and what does that mean? I should eat. I should eat, kind of thing. But where we differ from the rest of creation, because we're made in his image, is because of what we see now. We have the ability to not just interpret what it is that we see, but to also begin to evaluate and begin to add value or add meaning or add significance to what it is that we see. So that's why I wanted to start this morning with the mirror and looking at, when you look in that mirror, what is it that you see? What is it that you see? How do you interpret what it is that you see in the way that you view yourself? And here's the question that I think we should think about, because when we're looking at now, we have this mirror and we have this image before us that is broken. So now here's the question that we should ask, and you see this around on the screen as well, and that is, do you see the cracks or the reflection? Because if I'm a reflection of God and who he is, then I think about what sin is. Sin is the cracks, right? So do I see the cracks or do I see the reflection? And one of the things I really want you to walk away with is if we look at the creation account, we'll see that, again, that the declaration, us being made in God's image, happened before the fall. So what I'm saying is our identity, our image is completely established. And the fall does not change who we are. It doesn't change the fact that we are still made in the image of God. So now the question is, do I see cracks or do I see reflection? So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to spend some time talking about the cracks. Talk about the cracks. I had to make sure I say the cracks, because I think when I was practicing this morning, I could say, we're going to talk about crack, which is, a totally different thing. So we're going to be talking about the cracks this morning, and then what we're going to do next week is we're going to look at the restoration of the reflection. So we're going to talk about that next week. But I think it's important for us to understand. So here's what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of instances in Scripture, and we're going to do a little test. So remember, the crack is our sin, our failure, our struggle. The reflection is the fact that we are still made in the image of God and who He is. So we're going to look at these two instances with these questions in mind. Do we see crack in this passage, or do we see reflection in this passage? So here's the first one. Luke chapter 5, verse 8. It says, when Simon Peter realized what had happened, so what had happened? What had happened was, but what had happened? So again, Jesus comes along. He begins to teach his crowd. He stands in the boat. As he's standing in the boat, he's talking to the crowd. He's talking, and so he turns to Peter and he says, or Simon Peter says, "Hey, go out. Let's go out and let's throw your nets out so we can catch fish." And Simon Peter's like, "Bruh, we've been fishing all night. We've just washed our nets. We haven't caught a thing. But because you say so, we'll go out." So then what happens is they go out, they do their thing, and then boom, they catch and they catch. And the catch is so significant that Simon Peter and Andrew have to call out to their partners, James and John, to come out with their boat to help them bring the catch in. And so once they get to the shore, this is Simon Peter's response. So it says, when Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said, "Oh Lord, please leave me. I'm such a sinful man." So based on that passage, do we see crack or reflection? Exactly. Crack. We see crack. So with that in mind, I think it's important for us to understand, I think that the mistake sometimes we have a tendency to do is we have a tendency to overemphasize our crack, or overemphasize our sin, or overemphasize our struggle. And sometimes we could do it to the point where even the struggle is greater than the presence of God. So, think about this. Jesus Christ is standing in the boat. And of course, we know that Jesus Christ came for the redemption of mankind. And I'm sure that at this point, Simon Peter didn't really understand that. But it's amazing. He knows that something incredible has happened, and all he can see is not the chance to be different. All he can see is his sin and how unworthy he is. That's what happens when we focus on our cracks. But going on, Luke chapter 5, verse 10, his partners, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were also amazed. Jesus replied to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will be fishing for people." So do we see cracks or do we see reflection? What do we see? Reflection. So all Peter did was he saw how unqualified he was. But even in the midst of his quote-unquote disqualification of himself, Jesus invites him in. And Jesus says, from this point forward, you will be fishers of people. In other words, you are that reflection. And you are going to draw people to come to know me. Because remember, we talked about this last week. We said another way that we can know that we're made in the image of God and that we can respond to the work that God has done in us is what we do is we look at the Trinity itself. Because it says, let us make man in our own image. And we established last week the us is the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And again, the us, as we look at that, one of the roles that they have is that the Father points to the Son as well as to the Spirit, and the Son points to the Father and the Spirit points to the Father and the Son. And so what he is inviting Simon Peter to do is also to step into that opportunity where now he's fulfilling God's image. How? By pointing people to the Son, by pointing people to the Father, by pointing people to the Spirit. You will be fishers of people. That means you will have the opportunity to be able to reflect them. Here's another one. There's this guy named Isaiah, and Isaiah wrote a book called Isaiah. It's pretty stunning stuff right there. And Isaiah is found in the first half of the Bible called the Old Testament, just a little bit past the middle. And what happens is he has the opportunity to see a vision. And in this vision, he sees God on the throne. And he sees angels, and these angels that they describe are what's called seraphim. And he says, with two wings, these angels covered their eyes, and with two wings, they covered their feet. and with two wings they were flying. And then also what they were is they were singing out, holy, holy, holy. They were singing out worship and honor of God and who God is. And in this moment, here is Isaiah's response in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 5. Then I said, it's all over. I am doomed, for I am a sinful man. I have filthy lips, and I live among a people with filthy lips. Yet I have seen the King, the Lord of heaven's armies. So do we see cracks, or do we see reflection there? We see cracks, right? He says, I'm a sinful, woe to me. I'm a sinful man. And back then, there was this understanding that if someone saw God in the fullness of his glory, because he's so holy and we are so imperfect that, boom, you die immediately. So he sees this and he's thinking, I'm going to die. Like that is his reflection. Like, oh my goodness, this is what's going to happen. So again, he sees his unworthiness. Again, he sees his cracks in this moment. But look at how the angel and God responds in Isaiah chapter 6, verses 6 to 8. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a burning coal he had taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. He touched my lips with it and said, see, this coal has touched your lips. Now your guilt is removed and your sins are forgiven. Then I heard the Lord asking, whom shall I send as a messenger to this people? Who will go for us? And I said, here am I, what? Send me. So do we see cracks in this passage or do we see reflection? We see reflection. Because now what happened is, and this is beautiful in this point, because, I mean, think about it. He acknowledges, and this is important, I want us to understand this. When I talk about making sure that we see reflection in the midst of the broken mirror, when I'm talking about us seeing reflect, I'm not saying to ignore the cracks. I'm not saying to ignore the cracks. I think it is good for us to be able to say, like, man, here's some things that I need to work on. Here's some cracks in my mirror. Here's some ways that I need to grow and to develop. And we do need to acknowledge where the cracks are. But what we have to understand is that the cracks do not define us. The reflection defines us. The reflection is who we are. That's what we are grounded in. And so what happens is I love this, is that the seraphim comes down, and remember Isaiah said, I'm a man of unclean lips. And so what does the seraphim do? He touches the very thing that Isaiah declares that makes him unworthy. And then he begins to restore this reflection or restore this mirror. Like I said, we're going to spend more time talking about that next week. And then I love that. Once he sees how restored he is, then he steps in and he responds to the call. And now it's an opportunity for him to be a reflection, for people to be able to see the image of God through the messages that Isaiah is communicating. They're able to see the reflection of God through his life. And when you go through Isaiah, there are some incredible passages that are there about Jesus Christ and who he is and what he would do and who he would be. It's powerful. It's powerful. So I want to encourage us to make sure that the commitment that we're making is to be able to see ourselves as reflections as well. And you can see this right on the screen. The difference between seeing the crack or seeing the reflection is recognizing the truth about your value. Is recognizing the truth about your value. Remember, the eye sees and then the eye interprets what it is that it sees. And what we see when it comes to looking at ourselves, if I look at the crack or if I look at the reflection, what I see will determine the depth and the riches of my relationship with God. It will also determine how I respond to life. It will also determine how I respond to the possibility of God being able to use me. It will also determine the way that I interact with others. It determines every aspect of my life when it comes to recognizing how I am grounded and founded in who God made me to be. I am made in his image. So again, do I see the cracks or do I see the reflection? Now, here's the thing I want us to understand is I believe we live in a society that trains us to see our cracks. We really do. I mean, think about it. If someone blows it, if someone makes a mistake, what do? We label them, and we label them according to their crack. Backstabber, liar, adulterer, uh, thief, con artist. Like we label, and then also, isn't that what we do too? Is we look in the mirror and I look at my cracks and I label myself according to my cracks and what it is that I see in the mirror. And then sometimes we even add in the Christian element. And what we do is we make our relationship with God based upon our cracks. And the idea behind that is if I am living and my cracks are manifesting themselves, then that means that I am unworthy of God. I'm unworthy of who He is. And I am unqualified for God to be able to use me. When we forget, as we read through the Old Testament, He used adulterers, murderers, liars, thieves. He used them. Why? Because again, our cracks don't define who we are. And then here's the other thing about it too. And this is, for me, this is probably the most dangerous part about identifying ourselves based upon our cracks. Because what we will do is then we will also limit the capacity of God's grace to restore us based upon how we see our cracks. God forgives me, but, right? God loves me, but, right? We add a qualifier to it because we think that, again, our cracks minimize His grace. And the danger about that is we can actually fall into making our cracks greater than His grace. And that's the real danger of this. So I think it's important for us to really begin to ask ourselves this question. Do I see my cracks or do I see the reflection? Because the beauty of this is that, let me grab a big piece here. The beauty of this is that although this is broken, it still does what? It still reflects. Although it's broken, its core purpose, its core role is still established. The cracks do not change that. So this is why I want to encourage us to take some time out to think about, how do I see me? How do I see myself? And to understand again that the fall, the struggle, the wrestle, the setback does not negate the declaration. Does not negate it. And when we understand that, then what happens is there's another passage that I think is really, really powerful that we can look at and we can see. And that passage is Romans chapter 5, verse 8. It says, "But God showed His great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still what? While we were still sinners." So while we were still, while we were still living out our cracks, right? It's not like we said, it's not like, I mean, not shake so hard. It's not like we said, okay, I'm going to put that down. So it's not like we said, let me get my cracks together. And here's the issue about the cracks too. I mean, we look at this mirror and it's pretty what? It's pretty decimated in a lot of ways. So I don't care how much crazy glue I have. I can never put back the cracks. And maybe I'm able to put aspects of the mirror back into place. But the problem is the cracks will always be seen. It will always be there. So this is why me trying to commit in my relationship with God by being a good person, being good, all being good means is I'm trying to put my mirror back together and trying to fix my cracks on my own. And even then, the emphasis is not in my reflection, the emphasis is on fixing my cracks. So the result of that is I never step into becoming who God desires for me to be because I'm always focused on my cracks. So what Jesus did, and like I said, we're going to jump into this next week, so I don't want to jump into too far. But what Jesus did is Jesus came to restore the mirror. He came to restore the mirror. So I want us to understand that. And I want us to walk away with two things today. The first thing is asking, do I look at my cracks or do I look at my reflection? And the second thing, I have to remind myself that my cracks do not negate my reflection. I am still made in his image, and nothing could ever change that. I am still made in his image. That's why you are worth dying for. That's why you are worth Christ doing what he did on the cross for you. It's because when he looks at you, he doesn't see your cracks. When he looks at you, he sees reflection. And he wants to restore that reflection so that you are now fully able to live and be who God has fashioned and created you to be. So, do I see my cracks or do I see my reflection? So again, here at Encounter, one of the things that we make a commitment to do is to live out the great commandment in our lives. And so in the great commandment, we see what? It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. So for loving God here at Encounter, we say love up. For loving your neighbor, we say love out. For loving others, and for loving yourself, we say love in. And what we do is at the end of every message, we look at how do we see this in the message that we could take and apply it to our lives. And sometimes we'll have application points. Sometimes we'll have questions to be able to reflect on and think about. So when it comes to love up, here's the question. How do you think your view of God would change if you embraced him seeing you as his reflection and not your cracks? How would you think your view of God would change if you embraced him seeing you as his reflection and not your cracks? Love out, the way that we love others. Who have you labeled by their cracks? And how can you see them as a reflection? Who have you labeled by their cracks? Because when we see people by their cracks, our natural mentality is to do what? Is to write people off by their cracks. But if we see them by their reflection, we see the opportunity to be healed. Now, I want to make this really clear. I'm not encouraging us to stay in abusive situations or things like that. And there are times where we do need to have boundaries, and there are times where we do need to step away. And I think that that's healthy. But I think also it is important for us to be able to look at, even if we step away, we're praying for the restoration of the reflection, for God to be renewed in that way. And then love in, and I really want to encourage you to do this week, to do this week. Read Psalm 139, verses 13 through 18. So go through, read it. And then go back and read it again. But when you read it again, read it noting how God made you. Because there's some really great declarations in that passage. And then once you do that, and once you kind of note that out, then go back. So when you do this, sit down with pen and paper as you do this. And then when you go back, read it again. But this time when you read it, you want to read it noting what God feels about you. What does the passage say that God feels about you? So if we're able to do this, then again, I'm praying that what it'll do is it'll move us to a point where we are able to see ourselves the way that God sees us. The way that God sees us. And that maybe, just maybe, we can begin to step into the newness of the life that he has to offer to us in the way that he desires to work in us. And the reality is, we're always going to have cracks that we need to work on that will manifest themselves and show things. There will always need to be work done and growing and movement in our life. But the difference is, now, instead of looking at my cracks and seeing how unqualified I am because of them, I will look at the reflection and say with my cracks, I can move beyond you to continue to reflect God in his image in the way that he moves and works in me. Jesus, I thank you.